How to get chair succession right. Sooner or later, any board will have to appoint a new chair. It's one of the most important and often underestimated decisions. The chair sets the tone. They shape how the board works, how decisions are made, and how effectively the board supports and challenges the executives. But too often, chair succession is treated as a process to manage rather than a real opportunity to step back and think, what does this organization actually need in the next years, in the years to come? Welcome to the Better Boards podcast series, the podcast for chairs, CEOs, non-executive directors, company secretaries, and their advisors. Every episode is filled with practical insights and learnings from those inside boardrooms. We discuss what really matters and highlight actionable steps you can take to enhance the performance of your board. I'm Dr. Sabine Dembkowski, founder and managing partner of Better Boards. We make the boards of the most ambitious organizations more effective. Our mission at Better Boards is to help create better boards. Basically, we do what it says on the tin. We do this by providing clients with an evidence-based approach to board evaluations and board development programs. Our clients have access to an innovative digital platform for their internal and external evaluations. I'm delighted to be joined by Louise Angel. Louise is a senior managing director at Teneo and a leading board headhunter specialising in chair and non-executive director appointments for UK companies. She works closely with boards on succession planning, board composition and effectiveness, and has advised on many complex and high-profile chair appointments. Louise, thank you so much for making time and contribute to the Better Boards podcast series. Thank you.
Thank you, Sabine. Great to be here.
So we are talking about something any board will have to do at one stage. So why is a chair succession really such a pivotal moment for any board?
I think it's one of those times, Sabine, when you can change the trajectory of a board and how it's operating, because the chair is so important to a board and a company. And we often talk about it as running the board, being the chair's job. But in reality, it's so much more than that. It's a far-reaching and subtle role. And the chair creates an environment where people feel able to speak openly, where they, challenge effectively, and where discussions lead to better decisions. So, when a board is working well, it's normally because the chair is working really well. And for a company where the chair is good and it's working well, naturally they feel very anxious about maintaining that good functionality under a new chair. And equally, for a company where the chair is not working at optimum capacity, it's actually a huge opportunity for them to change things and for the non-executives to drive perhaps a different approach. So either way, it's it is a crucial moment.
Yeah, and I have certainly seen the influence of chairs on the performance of the group in my time doing board evaluations. I mean, it's hugely important. I think at times even chairs underestimate the impact they have on the culture, on the way people talk with each other, on the way people feel about being on a specific board. I mean, the tone setting cannot be overestimated.
I think that's right. And I think that the interpersonal skill set that the chair brings to the board, their own leadership skills, is now recognised as being hugely important, as much as their industry experience, functional experience, etc.
So as it's such a crucial role, when should boards really start planning for the transition?
I would say earlier than a lot of people would think. Probably 18 months in advance is a reasonable rule of thumb. And it's not just about starting them, but it's about using that time to really think, what does the company need over the next phase of its evolution? Is it a case of a continuation candidate, or is the context changing? Do they need to grow, transform? Is there some sort of increased scrutiny that the new chair needs to bring a skill set to? And then you also have to think about the sequencing of the relationship between, the succession of the chair and the CEO, so that those two things can't come too close together. If those are happening in the same, let's say, 18-month window, that is too close together. So you need to stage these things. And searches always take longer than clients might anticipate. sometimes because they themselves want to slow down the timetable and they have other considerations that they want to concentrate on for a while. If you think about the search earlier and you go to market earlier, you're probably going to have a greater selection of candidates because you can speak to both those who are available now, but also those who might be available a little bit further down the line.
Two things come to mind when I listen to you now. I mean, one is, it's not always easy to basically bring it up, is it? To basically say, "Oi, it's time to go. Let's plan for your succession." I've seen quite some boards who find this quite awkward and try to kick the can down the road as long as they possibly can. I'm sure you've seen this as well, or?
Yes, yeah, I think that's right. Yeah, certainly have. I think one of the protections against it being awkward is that the senior independent director, who's obviously going to be leading this process, that they start having this conversation early with the chair as to, what are your plans vis-a-vis this company, your portfolio, etc. How long do you think you would be keen to continue in this role? And you're starting that in a conversational, informal way. So I think, like any succession, the earlier you start talking about it, the more it becomes a routine matter on the agenda rather than something that is very loaded because you're bringing it up at a certain point in time. But yeah, it does require a bit of bravery, I think, for the SID sometimes to have that conversation, and particularly where the chair is perhaps not performing to expectations, and there is pressure from their non-executive colleagues to have this conversation, but they know that it won't be welcomed by the chair.
I mean, the other thing that comes to mind, that what I'm seeing now, I mean, it's quite tough out there, isn't it? I mean, lots of challenges. And the more challenging it becomes, the safer many organizations would like to play it. So everyone basically has the same candidates in mind because they would like to feel safe. Do you see this as well?
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, chair succession is an inherently conservative process. And quite often, nomination committees feel that responsibility, selecting the right candidate quite keenly. And what they sometimes do is to look for prior chair experience very closely. So you find that people who have been chairs find it much easier to acquire other roles than those trying to break into it. The other thing that is often prevalent in the chair community is a background as a CEO, because there is a sense that, having done the CEO's job is important. And sometimes, the chair would be able to stand in for the chief executive in extremis. So, being an ex-CEO or an ex-CFO also can really make the search quite narrow sometimes. And you need sometimes a bit of bravery to actually look beyond some of the obvious things and think, really, what does our company need? What are the important things for us? Clearly, this person may have been a chair somewhere else, and that's great, but it's not the same as our business. And sometimes, we have had clients go for, a more creative option that has worked out really well.
So there's a lot of talk about this bravery and looking for candidates outside of the box, but reality at times can be different. What do you think? What should boards really define what they're looking for in a new chair? And what would help them to think a little bit more outside the box?
Yeah, I think quite often boards here are starting with a tick list of prior chair experience, what's the right sector background, how much PLC exposure do they need to have had, etc. But those things are not, they matter, but they're not what determines whether or not somebody will be effective in your particular context. So I think the more interesting question is, how does this person need to operate? What's the style of leadership that's going to work with this board? What are the areas of the current chair's leadership that we want to retain, and what is wanting? Where are the opportunities to do something a bit different? And crucially, what does the CEO need? And what might a future CEO need? So some of these deeper questions, I think it's important to ask and really spend time fleshing that out, either as a group without a search consultant or facilitated by the search consultant.
And then of course, there are external candidates, but there are also maybe internal candidates. How do you see this balance, and how should boards deal with this? Because if there is an internal candidate, she might feel overlooked.
Yeah, so I think internal candidates can be really attractive because they know the business, they understand the board, they know what the relationships are, and they can give continuity. And in the best case scenario, they're leveraging the good relationships to good effect from the outset of their tenure as chair. So they can really hit the ground running and may have good confidence of the executive team. But it's important to look at how they're perceived by the full range of stakeholders, and critically, what does the chief executive think of this proposed internal candidate? And, would all your colleagues support their appointment? So again, this can be a very delicate discussion, but I think where you have an internal candidate who perhaps isn't going to meet that bar for acceptance by others, is important to, have that conversation with them early on and let them know whether or not it's a good use of their time, frankly, to be in the process. Going with an external candidate can help to bring in, fresh perspectives, people who've seen different things and can challenge the house view in a helpful way. But equally, some of the non-execs around the table will have experience outside the hiring company too. So it's not clear cut that an external candidate will be better. And of course, an external candidate will be just less well known sometimes to the board. So they will have their own, pluses and minuses too. It's just that these may be sort of less visible. And that's where very deep referencing and assiduous referencing is important.
So what are the little mistakes that boards do that you have seen? What are the typical problems, challenges that boards face and where they don't do things the best way?
Yeah. So I think that not having clarity on what the brief is one mistake. There isn't that clarity on what we're looking for, what's important for us, what are the must-haves, what are the nice-to-haves, etc. Where there is that water is kind of muddy and it isn't cleared up at the beginning, that's a mistake. Of course, you reserve the right to change your mind, but it's important that everybody starts on the same page and buys into what the process is going to look for. The second is that, as we've talked about, the board is too risk averse and lets that risk aversion dominate the process. I've seen, first time chairs do a brilliant job, or people who don't have direct industry experience equally do a fantastic job. The third thing I think is that the SID is so important in this process, as we said, and where they are uncomfortable with their role, which is to give strong leadership but understated and allow, a democratic process. So striking that right balance can be tricky, but a chair who's too hands off or equally who's too controlling can create difficulties. And then maybe a couple more things. One is pace. A process that's too slow will lose you candidates as you go along. People will be making their own judgments about how does this board operate and does it take them too long to make decisions. And then, remembering that candidates are assessing you as well. So the way you speak to them, the quality of conversations, the clarity of thinking, you, the interviewing board, exhibit in the process really matters and will impact on whether or not somebody wants to join your board. So if you're not organised and all on the same page, within reason, that won't reflect on you. So you need to remember that candidates are, they're buying as well as selling in this process.
We always try towards the end of the podcast come to the positive, to the bright side of life. Yeah. So what makes a well-run chair search process? What do you see for organizations, NOMCOs, who really get it right?
Yeah, I think that in a way it's a reverse of some of the things I've said, that really strong leadership from the SID who spends time on it. These processes are time consuming and so somebody who really sets aside time in their diary to make this process work, who invests in gathering feedback, checking alignment with colleagues and doing all the bits around the edges. That's really crucial. Who, as we said, is prepared to be a bit brave sometimes in having difficult conversations. I think that, thinking ahead as well, as we've said, thinking we're not appointing for today, we're appointing for the next 6, maybe 9 years. So having that, real clarity of vision as to what the company's going to need going forward. Managing the CEO effectively as well, I think, is something we haven't talked about, but clearly the CEO is a hugely important stakeholder in this. They're not the only stakeholder in this. So ensuring the right balance of input from them, they have a voice, but not being too overly driven by their views and wants is important as well.
Yeah, because, that's a topic for another podcast. This crucial relationship between chairs and CEOs of course, somehow it has to be a match. The chemistry needs to be right.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's, on that, it's also the chair's role to mold themselves to the CEO. So you want to appoint somebody who's got some dexterity to work well with a particular chief executive now, but that person may not be the same going forward. So, somebody who's also going to be, have a good shot at being the right person for the next CEO as well.
Oh, fantastic. We come to the end of it, and there's always this big question. What are the 3 things our listeners should take away from this podcast?
So I think, firstly, chair succession is an opportunity. It's not just a process. It's really an opportunity to step back and think about what does the board need, what does the company need to evolve, and what's our opportunity here to get something maybe different, new, as good as we can. The second would be, really spend time getting the brief right and look beyond those superficialities of the companies and roles that they've worked in the past. And then running a process that is human, rigorous but human. The mechanics matter, but also the human dynamics. You can't overstate those. So being able to, as I said, balance those 2 aspects of the process is a recipe for success.
Fantastic. Louise, thank you so much for contributing to the Better Boards podcast series.
Thank you, Sabine. Good to talk.
Thank you for listening to this episode. If you have any questions about how we work with our clients, if you have any ideas about future episodes, get in touch. We always love to hear from you. There are real people behind this. It's not AI generated, and we really love to engage. So reach out to us. You can best reach us on info@better-boards.com.